J. Scherr.
J. Scherr
business consultant.
J. Scherr.
J. Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey, everybody. I'm J. Scherr with J. Scherr Business Consulting. We build solid foundations for service-based businesses to grow and scale and achieve the results and success they deserve. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Poet and playwright Oscar Wilde said, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all." Well, on today's episode, we talk about living our best lives, overcoming adversity, the power of perspective, unleashing inspiration, meaning, and joy, and more. Our guest is a husband and father of four. He's a two-time #1 national best-selling author, a world-renowned inspirational and TEDx speaker, transformational coach, and host of the top-rated Live Inspired podcast with more than 2.5 million downloads. He inspires over 50,000 people each year at live and virtual events to wake up from accidental living, pursue big goals, and lead lives of impact. His list of clients includes Southwest, Pepsi, Microsoft, Lego, MetLife, and many, many others. Please welcome the man who's reminding us how to truly live and that our best days are in front of us, JohnOLeary. John, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see you.
Oh man, we have a lot to talk about after that introduction. Now I have some anxiety that you brought on the wrong guest today. So I have big shoes to fit into. And Jay, it's an honor to be with you, man. So thank you for the time.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. So to your point, we do have a lot to talk about. And I was sharing with you before the cameras were rolling about how you and your story first came into my consciousness. And it was really through your first book, On Fire. And I was at the library one day and was looking through the title of books and happened to see yours. Something about it drew me to the book. I opened it up and I've got to tell you that your words, the story pulled me in. And it was one of those, I sat there for hours. I could not put the book down. So much about you, about your life, about what you've been through, about the inspiration that you've been able to pour into others since that story was first written. It's just an amazing, amazing journey that you've been on. And obviously that journey continues. And I felt that a good starting point for us would be not only to talk about the early story. I think it's important to give some context, but I would love it if you would share with us what you would say your favorite trait is about yourself.
Well, thank you all the way around. So thank you for grabbing the book and reading it and being moved by it, and then inviting me to join the larger family. So like I mentioned to you before we started recording, I made a coffee. I don't always drink coffee this time of day, but I'm drinking a coffee right now to join you, to live into the brand promise of our conversation. And to answer your question, you asked for one. I think I'll give you two, if that's okay. The book On Fire, when they first published that book, they sent me a copy of the cover. So when you're an author, they send you the cover art. And it's a big deal when you open this thing up. And when I opened it up, it was a picture of me, Jay, on the front of it wearing a suit with my arms crossed, looking out at the reader like, reader, look at me. I am a total stud. And if you invest in this book and read my wisdom, you too might be lucky one day. And so I wrote back and said, hey guys, did you read the book? Did you read the manuscript before you designed the cover art? Because the book's not about me. It's about what other people did for me, for our family, through their lives, through the gifts of their talents, for a cause bigger than themselves. So it's this really cool, miraculous, selfless story about life. All of that to say, one of the traits I recognize as I get older about me is humility, like awareness of how unimpressive I am. Like I'm really keenly aware of that. Like I'm not impressed by my own story. I'm not impressed by what I've achieved, because I recognize I could have done none of this stuff, first, without God, secondly, without amazing parents and siblings and family structure, support system, the doctors and the nurses and everybody else. So I'm not all that blown away by me, but I'm wowed by that story because in that story, other people showed up for me. So humility is something that I love in all leaders. And I know you speak to a lot of them on the podcast. In a marketplace where we see very little positive examples of humility, I just encourage your listeners and viewers to choose humility. It's extraordinarily attractive, and it is a foundational leadership characteristic. So humility. And the second one is faithfulness. I, in spite of the headlines of the day, and there are lots of negative ones as you and I connect today, and they've always been negative and they will be negative going forward. I am wildly optimistic that our best days are in front of us personally, in our businesses and our country and our nations, plural. And part of that is the eternal lens that I view life with. So I have a lot of joy for the day, a lot of passion to attack it well, because I recognize it's ultimately not just for me, it's for others. And for me, that comes out of a sense of like a God calling. So humility and faithfulness, I hope, are characteristics people see in me.
Beautifully said. And what you had just mentioned toward the end of that about looking through life through a certain lens, we're going to dig into that in a bit more detail, because I think that's an important one for us to think about, for us to learn some of the things that we can do to look at life in a different way, especially today as we are just inundated with the negativity, as you mentioned, some of the negative news, some things that are going on around the world, the pandemic that we are living through, current news stories, et cetera. So we'll talk certainly more about that. So let's wind the clock back. So January 17th, 1987, it's a day that your life changed. And for those of our listeners who may not know your story, at least the beginning piece of your story, why don't you share a thumbnail sketch of that story? And I want to center the conversation around those unsung heroes. We know that not all superheroes wear capes. We've heard that before. You have had some superheroes in your life, and I want to shine a spotlight on some of those individuals as you tell us the story.
So I will race in some regards through it, but then invite you to say, tell me more about her or him or them or that. So here's the story. In some regards, Jay, it starts about a week before. The week before, I saw boys in my neighborhood playing with fire and gasoline. They were 11, I was 9, and I'm looking up at these kids thinking, if they can do it, so can I. And for our business leaders on the line, and that is all of you listening, some of you are at risk right now of thinking that we are about to share a burn story with you. And that's wildly misleading. This is all a leadership story. It happens to revolve a little bit around being burned, but that's not the story here. It's really a leadership story. We become like those we pay attention to. So it's important that we tune in to information that is life-giving and influences us toward good. And as important as that is, and you understand this, Jay, people are watching you. They watch the way you walk into the office. They watch the way you walk into a coffee shop. They watch the way you drive. Give them an example that is worthy in a marketplace that has plenty of the other types of examples. So that weekend, I'm watching these good kids and I figure I can do it. So the following weekend, my dad goes off to work. It's not unusual. He had a big job. My mom went off with a couple of my sisters. It's not unusual. She had 4 daughters and 2 sons. So I'm by myself in this house thinking if they can do it, so can I. I walk into the garage, bend over a can of gasoline, light a piece of cardboard on fire, try to pour a little bit of the gas on top of the flame. And it's a 5-gallon can, Jay. That's like 42 pounds, too heavy to pick up, I remember. So I set the flame on the floor, bear hug the container, start to tip. And before the liquid even came out, the fumes rushed out of that container, inhales that little baby innocent flame into the can, created a massive explosion, splitting the can in 2, picking me up and then launching me 20 feet against the far side of the garage. And when we're little, we were taught to stop and drop and roll, which is easy to recite back until you find yourself on fire. And I think so often we train at the cognitive level, take notes, listeners and viewers, take notes, but we live and we lead and we serve. I think we sell and we buy from a far more sacred source. So my job is always to open up people's hearts and minds, not just their minds, but really both. I think it's an undivided life. You and I talked about that before we started recording. Not just business people, it's business and relationship and health and finance and charitable giving and faith. It's all these things combined as one. That day for me, they were separate, and I panicked and I ran. And here comes one of the unsung heroes. And then I'll let you ask any questions you want around him or the others. But I came running on fire through the kitchen, come burning now into the front hall, and I stand on top of a rug just begging for a hero, like praying for a savior. God, I'll take anybody. I remember praying that, God, I'll take anybody. And I saw my brother Jim, who was 17. I was 9. My brother Jim had never done anything kind for me in my entire childhood. So he was not exactly the one I was thinking, this is the guy, to use your terminology, wearing the cape. Jim was not wearing a cape that day or any day before that day in my life. And yet, this is his day. Leaders, he's 17. You may be older or younger. I would imagine most of us are older. But this is our day, like to stop making excuses and to step forward doing something big in your business, in your family, in your life, in a nation that is longing for leaders and heroes to step forward. What my brother does is he picks up a little like rug. It's the kind you're supposed to wipe your feet on. He runs over to me. The flames are leaping 3 feet off of my body, fueled by the gasoline. This 9-year-old little boy is just engulfed. And my brother Jim swings down once and then twice and then a third time. And then he dropped the rug. I'm still on fire, but he dropped the rug and he pulled back because he got burned, man. He touched something hot. And what he did is natural. When we live lives that are about us, this is the common reaction. Save yourself, man. Move away from whatever the thing is. Take care of you. It's very common. It's great practice these days. But what if that's actually not the call? What if growing the business is actually not just about the vacation home? What if it's not just about early retirement or what we can do with our talent? What if it's about ultimately utilizing your gifts and your time and your talent and your treasure for something bigger than yourself? Like, what if that's the whole call of life? And that day, I think my brother Jim recognized this. This may sound like a stretch. I don't think it is. He recognized that his life was not just about him, which fueled him to pick up the rug, to step back into the fight, to swing down a 4th time, and then a 5th, and then a 6th, to eventually beat down the flames, to wrap me in that rug, carry me outside, jump on top of me, save my life, run back into a burning house, usher 2 of my sisters out, get the dog out, call 911. 1987, the lifesaver of the year for the state of Missouri was not a National Guardsman or woman. It was not a police officer. The lifesaver of the year was a 17-year-old, pimple-faced jerk brother named Jim who changed. And I think that's, in so many regards, that's like what your podcast calls out of people, the ability to change and to shine. So grab your coffee and get ready to go to work. That's what Jim did that day.
So let's stop on that point for a moment. It's an amazing example of stepping up and taking care of those around you, not being focused only on me, but how can I serve others? How can I serve someone else? This is my opportunity to step up and do what is necessary. So clearly a hero on so many levels. What I would love to find out from you is the rest of the story for Jim. So how did this change Jim, not only in that moment, but how did Jim change as a human being from that point forward? What happened with him?
So we'll end the tape with where the tape is right now. My brother Jim is a dear friend of mine. We're going on vacation together in about a week. When I was married, Jim was my best man. When he was married, he invited me to be his. When I had my first child, the godfather is a man named JohnOLeary. And when Jim had his first, the godfather is a guy named John. So it shares a little bit of the context of what our life looks like today as brothers, which is not how it was when we were kids. And I'm not trying to be dramatic here. 8 years difference. That's a long time. He was probably a very typical 17-year-old boy, but his life was about him. And he made sure every younger sibling knew that. That day, though, and then each day going forward, my brother changed. What does that look like? It looks like the first family member outside of my mom and dad to visit me in hospital was my brother Jim. And at that point, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but at that point, I wasn't able to talk yet. And so I clicked to him. It's a long story, but I'm not able to communicate due to trachs and stuff like this. So they have a little talk board and they point at a letter. And when they get to the right letter, I click. So J, you got to wait till you hit the J. And then when I hit it, and then the A, and then the Y. So that it takes forever. And I'm on morphine and it's a mess. But eventually I click out to him, Jim, you saved me. Like that's my response. And then his response, it goes back to my characteristic. His response is, I didn't do anything, John. You're doing all the work. And so this humble response of the inability to accept truth, even in his own life. He did save my life, but he refused to embrace that. He wanted to always turn it back on me. And that's not who he was back then, but it is who he is now. Today, my brother Jim is an attorney. He works personal injury, workers' comp, stuff like this, which sounds like, oh, he's one of those guys, chasing the ambulance everywhere they go. Not at all. My brother Jim does that work to make a difference in the lives of those that he is ultimately called to serve. He wants to help take care of these families. He wants to help make problems right. He wants to help redeem situations. He wants to help make sure that things that happen to other families won't happen to future families. So even his work, although he's successful at it, and that has financial components to it, it's mission driven. And so that humility, that faithfulness, that boldness, and that mission grows directly from that moment in his childhood. He's only 17 when he saw a fire burning hot in front of him and did something about it.
Wow. Incredible. So let's continue with the story. So we're outside. Jim has gotten you outside. The fire is out, at least on you.
Mhm.
And where do we go from here?
In short order, I'm in the front yard with two sisters. And if you want, I can come back to them. They are also heroes. And eventually I find myself in an ambulance on the way to a hospital. The first non-brother, non-two sisters, non-paramedic that I see is my dad. And before I see him, I hear him. And what I hear from him, Jay, is this roaring lion's voice coming down the hall saying, where's my boy, John? Where's my boy, John? And I heard that lion, and my father is a good man, but he's type A. He's a veteran, tough, righteous, and fair. But I just burned down his house, so I'm assuming he's furious and he's coming to finish me off. This nurse brings my father back to where I am in this hospital bed. She pulls back the curtain. My dad walks and marches over to me, points down, and then says very firmly, finger outstretched toward my face, John, look at me when I'm talking to you. So then I look up and then he responds, I have never been so proud of anyone in my entire life. And my little buddy today, this morning, I am proud, just proud to be your dad. And then this sweet man says, and John, I love you. I love you. I love you. And there's nothing you can do about it. And when I hear this, the very first thought, Jay, was no one told my dad what happened. Like clearly the old man doesn't know I burned down the house and look at the devastation I've caused. But what I did not understand yet is the power of grace and the power of love and the ability that wise stewards have to step into a very sad, difficult situation and just be there with us. And my dad was the first example of that for me. It changed my life. It did not make 5.5 months in hospital easy or years of recovery easy. But I don't think the journey would have been possible had my father not come in with that incredible love.
Just amazing. I think about as you're telling that story, the power of words, coming from the right person at the right moment, and how that can shift the entire trajectory of our life. It can change the way that we think. It can change our entire outlook on everything that is in front of us. It's an incredible story. And that story continues because your mother comes to you and you have a conversation with your mother. Share with us about that feeling that you had at that moment, wanting your mother to be there and what she said to you.
Well, and all this goes back to why, number one, I'm so unimpressed by me and so wildly impressed by others. And we're talking specifically about family here, and we'll stay there for a moment longer, but it's not just them. It's this whole mosaic of human beings who just showed up brilliantly. Not everybody, but those who did transformed my life. And I like this phrase, the power of words. We underestimate the power of words. Words matter. We forget it because we just use them. And it's just a tweet. I didn't even mean it. Well, tweets matter because words matter. So you're exactly right, Jay. Power of words. My mom comes in, she takes my hand, which matters too. My hand is hot. And as you'll learn later on in the story, eventually they'll have to amputate my fingers. The little child's devastated. It's 100% burn. It's a terrifically sad, difficult thing for her to observe and step toward. But she does so. That takes a ton of courage and faith, takes my right hand in hers, pats my bald head, and she says the words, "Oh, baby, I love you. I just love you." So I say back, "Mom, knock it off with the love. Am I going to die?" And when I asked the question, I assumed as a good mother, she would respond, "No, you're not going to die, baby. We'll get you out of here today. We'll swing you through Steak and Shake on the way home. You're going to be totally fine on this one," which is maybe what I wanted, but it's not what I needed. And I think it's true for many of us in our lives. Like what we want is not always what we need in that moment. What she gave me was truth, which is not what we frequently want, but it is certainly what I needed. She looked me square in the eyes using the power of words. And she said, "John, do you want to die? It's your choice. It's not mine." And this is not an indifferent mother. This is a mother whose heart is beating on the table next to mine. Like she's as broken as I am and as exposed as I am, but she recognizes she can't make me do this thing. Like I've got to do my part. I've got to take ownership here. So I look back at age 9 with no clothes and no skin on my body. And I look up and I say, "Mom, I do not want to die. I want to live." And her response was, "Good. Then look at me, honey. Look at me. Take the hand of God, walk the journey with him, and you fight like you have never fought before. Your Father and I will be with you every step along the way. But do your part. You got to fight. You got to fight." You talk about like a pregame talk that a coach might give her players. I mean, here it is. Like Mom, shortly after that, was ushered out. And not once over the next 5.5 months did I second guess whether I would live or die. When she said, "John, do you want to?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to." And she said, "Fine, take the hand of God and fight." It was on. And that day I placed my hands in his and said a prayer, started fighting forward, and continue to fight even 36 years later. But the fight continues. And I'm grateful for my father's love and my mother's boldness.
So good. And I'm also hearing some more leadership lessons right there. So as you think about those two conversations, the conversation with your father, the conversation with your mother, what comes to mind for you as you are working with businesses and coaching and speaking? What are the leadership lessons that resonate most with you from those conversations?
Well, we'll need about 4 hours to fully unpack two seemingly simple conversations, but let's spend a little bit of time on it. We'll go in reverse order with Mom first, because I think she's one of the most extraordinary leaders I've ever read about, and I happen to be raised by her. But she's just brilliant, and this is one example. And you read on fire. There's many others that are unpacked as we go forward into her story. But in this example, she demanded that I take accountability. She demanded that I take ownership. She demanded that my voice be heard and that I act upon the commitment that I made to her and to myself. And so there's an awful lot around this on setting a high standard of what is possible in someone's life, letting them opt into that themselves, and then insisting that they move toward what they said they would do. Also recognizing that they need someone to walk arm in arm with them toward it. Like, there's a lot there, I get it, but that's really what she's done there. Take ownership. You made this commitment. Go do what you said you would do, and you're not alone. I'm right next to you, and if you look to your right, your daddy's right over there. We're doing this thing together. So that's, I think, brilliant. On my mother's side, or I'm sorry, on my father's side, ultimately, there are two ways to motivate people, spouses, children, nations, voters, um, employees, teams, to make it a total leadership lesson. Number one is fear. And fear works well in the short term. It might get voters out. It might have people tune into the media for a moment. It might have an employee show up on time on Tuesday. But as soon as you turn your back, that fear mantra is gone. So in the old days of leadership, we used to use command and control. Command and control, man. Wear your whistle into work and like Captain Von Trapp, man, whistle and the kids will come. But as soon as the captain goes off on a business trip, the kids go off and play and they do their own thing. So that's not an effective long-term strategy. What I picked up on my dad is the far better way to do it, which is love, trust, and inspire, which means set the goals high, but also inspire them that they have everything they need already within their ability to achieve profound success in their lives. And you are standing at the beck and call to move in the direction with them. So my dad came into a very fearful situation, not finger outstretched in a sense where he was going to yell at me, but in a way where he was going to meet me right as I was, where I was, with love. And I know this is, well, John, you're talking about a father-son relationship or a burn story. No, we're talking about leadership. My leader stepped in, met me where I was with love. And it changed that moment. It changed the remainder of the conversation. It changed, I think, the remainder of the day. It prepped me for what was to come with my mom, and it made the rest of the journey possible. That's what when I hear those two stories and you say, John, draw the thread through, it's ownership for my mom and love for my dad.
Incredible. And all of my friends out there that are listening right now, I hope that you are taking notes, because through this story, and as John shares the incredible story that he's been through, but really the lessons that come out of this that are the most meaningful. That's where we learn. That's how we grow. So make sure, please, that you're taking notes and that you're applying these lessons. And another lesson that I heard through those two conversations, John, is the truth. There are too many situations, at least that I've seen, where an employer is sometimes apprehensive about telling the truth, having the difficult conversations. And it's all in the way that we deliver the message that matters. Again, it goes back to the words have impact, right? They have meaning. But your parents in this particular situation, they didn't sugarcoat the situation. They told you the truth, which to me is a high level of respect. I respect you enough as a human being to look at you in the eye and tell you the truth about the situation. Now let's talk about how we move past the situation, accountability, all the other things that you mentioned.
Totally agree. That's absolutely true. And sharing truth is so hard. And understanding what truth is even is hard, which is like a shocking statement, actually. Like, even understanding what truth is. But you are right. Great leaders identify, call it out for what it is, and then hold others accountable to achieve it and do so together.
I love the together part. And I want to talk about the power of mentors as well in this conversation. And for those who may not know the story, I'd love it if you would enter Jack Buck into the equation here with a focus on the life-changing aspects of mentorship and why mentors are so important to us.
It's just such a good story. I mean, There's talk actually of turning this On Fire book into a movie. And as they're doing so, I keep reminding those involved, like, please make this about Jack. Please make this about the normal, ordinary heroes who put on the capes. Please don't make this a Burn story. Please don't make this about a little boy and the miracle that takes place in that hospital bed. Make it about people showing up. And a big part of that is mentorship. So you bring up one of my favorite stories because it's about one of my favorite human beings who I had never met physically before I got burned. For the non-baseball fans in the room, not non-Midwestern baseball fans in the room, there's a guy named Jack Buck who was a broadcaster for the St. Louis Cardinals for 5 decades. So he's a Hall of Fame radio announcer. He made it into the Hall of Fame in 7 different Hall of Fame. So this guy is just a hugely successful guy. And in St. Louis, he's profoundly beloved. He was my hero as a little boy. He just never knew it because every little boy growing up had Jack Buck as his hero because he was the one who broadcast St. Louis Cardinals baseball into our lives. I got burned on a Saturday. There's no chance of survival. The math on this is they take the percentage of the body burned, so 100. Do the math at home, business leaders. 100%, add age, 9, and you've got mortality. So there's 109% likelihood that this child's going to die. So this is the situation Jack Buck walks into on Sunday when the little boy survives that first night. I am unable to see because my eyes are swollen shut. I'm tied down to a hospital bed due to it's the way they treated burn patients back then. I can't move anything. My lungs were burned. There's a trach in my neck. I can't eat or drink or talk. It's a messy situation. It's sad. And we know how it's going to end. It's going to end in tragedy. That's what everybody knows. Jack Buck had heard about the story, shows up the day after I get burned, sits down next to me and just says these words. You said the power of words earlier. Let's talk about them for a moment. Into my darkness, Jack spoke these words. Kid, wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. JohnOLeary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. Kid, are you listening? Keep fighting. And then he stands up, Jay. He walks out. He goes down the hallway, starts weeping, which is not weakness, business leaders. Put down the coffee for a moment. Take notes on that one. Jay asked you to take notes earlier. If you've written down nothing yet, write down these words. Crying's not weakness. Okay. In fact, the shortest verse in scripture is he wept. It's not weakness. It's love embodied. It's good to show emotion, healthy emotion at work and at home. So Jack is in the hallway weeping. One of the nurses walks over to this war hero. He's a Purple Heart recipient. He's been broadcasting for 50 years. She kneels in front of him and says, Mr. Buck, are you okay? And he says, I'm not sure that little boy won't make it, will he? And the expert says there's not a chance. It's his time. It's just his time. When this news shows up in our businesses and in our life and in our nation and in our nations, what we choose to do next will influence what happens next. So the good news is the future is not yet written. So all the naysayers out there, remember that the future is not yet written. Jack takes home the diagnosis, cries and prays and reflects, and then he journals on his favorite question, which is, what more can I do? And if you're looking for one leadership takeaway from this session, I implore you to write down those 5 words. What more can I do? Jack asked that nightly. It changed his professional life, but also what he did personally. He comes the following day to this burn center, even though it's a hopeless situation. Now it's Monday morning. He walks into my little room. I can't see him, but I hear the footsteps. I hear the chair get pulled across the floor. And then I hear him say, kid, wake up. I'm back. You're going to live. Got it? You're going to survive. Keep fighting. JohnOLeary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. See you soon. Jay, you know where the story goes, man. He comes back again and again and again for 5.5 months. When Jack was not able to show up for me because he was on spring training, he would send injured ball players for him in his stead. So these injured ball players getting their treatment in St. Louis started coming by. Then he started sending hockey players. He sent football Cardinals. We used to have a football team in the Midwest called the Cardinals. So the coach, Gene Stallings, some of these big players like Dan Durdorf were coming by visiting this little boy because showing up for people matters. because encouragement matters. And in a marketplace of naysayers and cynicism and isolation and negativity, I'm telling you right now, optimism, showing up, presence, encouragement, vision for tomorrow influences what happens next. It's why I don't have a subscription to the paper. It's why I don't allow my kids to watch the evening news. It's not healthy. We know about the shooting too, but rather than just complaining about it, we want to do something to make it better. And I think most people read headlines to be informed about how bad the world is. Jack and other great leaders are vaguely aware of what's wrong, and then they strive to make the wrong right.
So the story continues. And for all of you that are listening right now, I would encourage you, and I'll put links in the show notes to the rest of that story so you can hear more about the relationship between Jack and John, how that develops and how it continues, and how strong not only the relationship is, but again, going back to the power of mentorship and why all of us need to have mentors in our life, what that means for us, how that can help us grow and show us a vision of what the future can look like, learning from others.
Yes.
There is no better way. Reading is powerful. We need to read, but we also need to be able to apply that knowledge. And when we can work with a mentor, when we can have someone in our life who's been there, who's done that, who can show us a different lens of what life can look like, and then help guide us along that path, amazing things begin to happen. That's where magic happens.
And just the other side of that equation, and it starts now. So don't wait till, when I sell my third business, then I'll do what John's about to ask me to do, which is to become a mentor to others. And you're like, well, I don't have any skill sets. That's just a lie. I think it's an absolute lie. We all do. We all have time. I think the other thing we hear most frequently is, I don't have any time for that. We are busy too. My wife and I are both big brothers and big sisters. We don't have time. We got 4 kids and businesses and obligations and like all that stuff. And yet we've not only experienced the power of being mentored, which you referenced a moment ago, we also recognize those who have received a call to give it to influence. And so we try to actively serve and support in the community. What I've always learned though, Jane, I'm sure you've figured this one out as well. You do it, or at least I'll make it personal. I give to make a difference, like to make a difference in the marketplace. The reality always is this: my life is so much better than any life I've ever tried to mentor. Like I have been so much more influenced by the way they have taught me as I reach down than anything I've ever been able to do for them. So when we are mentored, we are elevated without a doubt by those who have been through the experiences, that have gained wisdom and insight. Yes. And there's profound beauty in being able to mentor someone else, because not only will you influence their life, the life that might be most changed is yours.
Very, very true. I love those words. I want to go back to the quote that I stated at the beginning when we first started this conversation, which is a quote by the poet and playwright Oscar Wilde. No doubt you've heard that quote before, but I want to get your impression on this, because the work that you do today has a direct correlation to part of this quote. And to remind you of that quote, and to remind our listeners, the quote was, "To live is the rarest thing in the world." And it truly is. We know that. But most people only exist. So John, when you're speaking to an audience, or when you're confronted with someone in your life who is just existing, what is how do you approach that individual? Because one thing that you mentioned earlier that resonates with me is you meet people where they are. So speak to helping someone who is trying to figure out, how do I find more purpose, more meaning? I'm just existing right now. How can I be more? How can I do more? I don't know what to do next.
I mean, it's it's the right question, but it's a loaded one. So the first thing I would just suggest, what I try to do, is meet people where they are. So I try my best not to be judgmental. It's one of my weaknesses, because I am, but I'm working on it. Like I'm a total work in progress. So I really want to meet people exactly as they are, not where I am, but exactly where they are, put my arms around them as they are. So that's really key. If we come in with a bullhorn, no one's going to pay attention. That's the common practice these days. So the first thing we've got to do is love them as is, no questions asked. And then as we elevate that relationship together, whether it's a spouse, a child, a coworker, a friend that we're growing closer to in the community, whatever that relationship might be, it is ultimately to draw the better angels of themselves, to see within them what they may not yet see within themselves. That's what a great mentor is able to champion. And let me make this personal. I for 28 years, saw no real talent in me. There's a scriptural part of my story. I'm a faithful guy, and I was at a church service on a Sunday, and the pastor was preaching on the talents, which means if you got 5 talents, double them. If you've got 3 talents, double them. But then the story comes to this one guy with 1 talent, which is how I self-identified, 1 talent, and he buried it. And when the master comes back and realizes that this guy buried his talent, he's irate. I'm like, why would you do this? So the pastor on that day, this is decades ago now, is saying, if you feel as if you have 1 talent, let me just tell you that God wants to do something with that talent that will multiply, not only in your life, but in the life of others. Frequently, we die with our 1 talent buried. Or for those of us who feel like we had 3 or 5, I'm extremely good looking, born into good for you. I'm glad you got 3 or 5 talents, but many times we'll bury those talents. And the call of all leaders, first and foremost for themselves, is to multiply. Multiply. And you can't multiply if you're being passive. And you can't multiply if you're addicted to either a phone or Netflix or the Wall Street Journal. You cannot multiply. So we've got to multiply by not enduring the day, but actively, intentionally, and activating those days for ourselves and for those we are called to serve. So I would strongly recommend leaders that we strive to animate. If you're trying to figure out how do I do that, a couple quick things you could consider doing is number 1, make a mission statement, which sounds like, John, I've done that with my business. I think we did that 11 years ago and it's boring. Perfect. So bring that back to the surface and do it again and make it electric. My personal mission statement comes out of the statement, I choose today to thrive because. So for those of us who feel a little passive or resigned to the monotony and the misery of life, ask yourself the question, I choose to thrive today because of. And in answering that clearly, you understand not only why you are called to thrive, but you also begin to recognize when you're not. And both of those things are important. So the reason hopefully you're feeling energy on this podcast, Jay, for me. Like I'm not phoning this one in, dude. Like I'm all in. And later on in my team meeting, I'm going to be all in. And when I get home for dinner, I'm going to be all in, and flying out late tonight, I'm going to be all in. Why? Well, I know why I'm here. Okay. Why? Because I'm here to thrive because God demands it. My family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. No excuses. This is what guides what I say yes to and no to when I wake up, when I go to bed, what I eat, what I don't, what I drink, what I don't, who I engage with, who I choose not to, what I listen to, everything. I choose to thrive because, not endure, not exist, not freaking hang on until retirement in 31. That's a bunch of crud. That is not living. I choose to thrive without fingers, in physical pain, struggling many days physically and emotionally. I'm not free of that, but I choose to thrive because God demands it. My family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. No excuses. So that's the operating statement. And then the final thing I'll add, and then I'm sure you may want to layer in some questions or thoughts, is, and how does this thing end? So the way you get there, the play, the end game is ask yourself the question, how do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be remembered? Is it really for being, well, I knew exactly what happened the other day in a city 11 away from, like, to be hyper aware of what's happening around the world? Is that how you want to be remembered, for being negative or like, how do you really want to be remembered? And the most powerful exercise, and feel free to borrow this with your business leaders if you'd like, Jay, is to write an obituary. And I always encourage the clients we serve to do 2 of them. One, write the obituary as it reads today and be honest. How's the marriage? How's the singleness? How's the addiction? How's where you're spending your time? What's working? What's not? What are people saying about you? What's the influence? What do you wish you had done? Be honest. Where are the gaps? Write it, read it, and then burn it, because that one's far less important than the next one. How do you want to be remembered? as a father, as a husband, as a spiritual child of God, as a business leader, as an influencer, as someone who worked not for themselves, but to create opportunities for others, who saw talents in others so clearly that they had not yet even identified them in themselves. And because of you and your role, you changed their lives profoundly. What's that statement look like? And then once that's defined and clearly articulated, what do you have to do to live into it? And one thing you don't have to do is be passive and endure and exist and wish away the day. So I strongly encourage people to recognize that you have a talent or 3 or 5, you're called to multiply, operationalize that with a mission statement, and then have clarity around what success looks like for you.
Such a powerful exercise. I'm going to do that myself. I've done a version of that in the past, but I'm going to do exactly what you just described to us. And I would encourage each and every one of you to do exactly the same thing. And John, one of the things that I've just discovered through years of failing and getting back up and trying things again is that when I am honest with myself, when I write down, when I'm asking myself those hard questions and being who I am, being clear about my truth, that is when I can start to see change happen. That's when I can at least reach a point where I can identify what the challenges are that I'm facing. I'm honest about it. Now I'm self-aware enough. I can do something with it. But until that time comes, I'm spinning is what I'm doing. I'm putting Band-Aids on that aren't getting to the root cause, that aren't going to create sustainable changes for myself and for those around me. So thank you for sharing that. I know it's something I'm going to begin to use. And again, for everyone that's watching and listening right now, do yourself a favor, do exactly the same thing. And I would love it if you would share with us some comments about how this has impacted you, share what you've written down, and put those in the comments for us. And I'll make sure that anything that you do share, I will also make sure that John receives a copy of that too.
Jay, thank you. And the exercise is meant not to be punitive. It's not made to make you feel like, dude, I'm the greatest failure this side of eternity. Not at all. The exercise is made to wake us up to what remains possible. And that word remains is a beautiful word. Like life is not over. There is, if you're still able to hear my voice and I have not yet rocked you to sleep, there is opportunity in your day. How cool to use it for good. How cool to be very directional in what you want to achieve, not only in someone else's version of what success might be, because that's frequently what we do. We climb someone else's version of that success ladder. That exercise, when you get down to it, like at some point you're in a casket and there are people talking about your life. This is going to happen. You are all mortal, terminal. Me too. So how do we want to live while we're here? How do we want to influence? What do we want to learn? How do we want to make people different because we're part of their lives? And what do we need to do each day so we can start living into that now? The beauty of a near-death experience is you recognize that tomorrow is not promised. And when you recognize that, it means also that you're not too worried about tomorrow. And the more we can passionately live this moment now, the more effective we can be in making our tomorrows far bigger and better than they would have been otherwise.
Beautifully said. So John, before we wrap up, and our time has gone by so quickly, which is amazing, but that just tells me that we've had a great connection here. And I truly want to make sure you know how much I appreciate you investing time with us and pouring into me, pouring into our audience and sharing of your knowledge, your insights, and your expertise. First, I would love it if you would share with all of us how we can connect with you. Obviously, your books are available anywhere. We're going to link to those. But what is the best place for us to go to learn more about you and consume more of your content?
So the content I share is always holding up a mirror. So I've been called a great observer, which means it's not like, hey guys, I got to tell you what I did yesterday. I dominated this. No. So I do have a lot of observings that I notice on life, and then I share those. Probably the best place to observe alongside of me and connect with me is at our primary website, and that's at JohnOLearyInspires.com. So JohnOLearyInspires.com. Social media links are there. The link to the Live Inspired podcast is there. Links to our books, On Fire, in Awe, are there. My email is there. My phone number is there. My mailing address is there. If you're sending Jay your obituary statement or the lessons, send them to me too. I can't tell you, the best part of the work is not the outward work, like what you and I are doing now. I love this. The best part is when a relationship forms. And when someone reaches out and says, man, I heard you on Jay Scherr's podcast. Awesome. I want to hear about that. So please do connect with me, share with me what you heard. And then my favorite part, Jay, is what I learned from Jack Buck. Jack did 4 things. He said yes. He learned about a little boy named JohnOLeary, and he said yes. The following day, he showed up. He then came back, and he brought friends. And it's that little circle that we try to model in the community. When there are moments of trauma in the marketplace, whether it's in Texas, very recently, or in a school, or a child gets burned, or a child's parents go through some extraordinarily difficult circumstance, and now the child's dealing with trauma, we want to be brought in because we will say yes. We will, I promise you, show up. We will, I promise you, come back, and we will bring friends. So if ever we can make a difference in the marketplace that you're tuning into Jay's podcast, wherever that might be, you got my information online, and I'm looking forward to saying yes to you.
Outstanding. And John mentioned his podcast. We are going to link to that as well. If you're enjoying this conversation, you have got to check out Living Inspired. It's an incredible conversational style podcast. John has remarkable people on that podcast where they share stories and they go deep. It is fantastic. So make sure that you add that to your playlist as well. John, here's my final question to you as we wrap up. What's the most difficult decision that you've had to make in the pursuit of who you've become?
So I've never been asked that before. I think it is to recognize that who you're trying to become, you already are. You're just masking it. We mask with alcohol, and I'll speak only from personal experiences, alcohol, busyness, addictions, success, thing after thing after thing after thing, rather than just saying that, who am I really? Because who we're trying to become, like, dude, that's already you. It's like the old Russian wooden dolls that maybe your great grandmother had around the house, where you take off one and, well, inside of it is still that same little doll, just a smaller version of it. And so what I would encourage me and then our listeners to do likewise is, rather than pursuing something in the future, celebrate the best of who we are right now, and then become more of that going forward into the future. So the best of who I am now was already with me as a kid in that church 20 years ago, when I saw myself as having one buried talent. It just took me 20 years to slowly pull off the makeup and the addictions and the busyness and the race and everything else, and all this garbage, to discern that. And in doing that, I am free. So that was the hardest decision, is to become who I already was. And in doing so, I'm liberated to be that far better version of myself.
Beautiful. I so feel you on that. And I know that everyone's listening right now can relate to that in one degree or another, too, if we're being honest with ourselves. And that's one of the keys here, is we have to be honest. Once we do that, we can create the freedom that John has expressed here. John, again, thank you so much. I'm grateful for you. I appreciate it. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been remarkable. And I've learned a lot, not only about you, but what you've shared in terms of leadership and life lessons and principles. So thank you.
Jay Scherr, you're the man. I love your voice and your cadence and your questions and your care. So, man, you've got a gift, and I thank you for inviting me into it.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. And would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate? We would love it if you would leave us a review. And if you got some value out of this episode, one of the best things that you can do is to share this with someone else who you believe can learn and can experience change through this message that was delivered on the podcast. So please do that. And to learn more about how Jay Scherr Business Consulting can help your business create a solid foundation to grow from, all you have to do is visit JayScherrBusinessConsulting.com And until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Please pick up a copy of On Fire and In Awe, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay Scherr.
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 Business consultant.
Jay Scherr, Business Consulting.